2018, registered voters in Rockford and Winnebago County said yes to a consolidation of the city and council's election offices, and that same question could make it on the ballot this November.
WIFR reporter Anthony Ferretti talks with two Winnebago County board members on how this question might shape the future of elections in this county.
Almost 69% of people voted in favor of consolidating the city of Rockford and Winnebago County's election authorities in 2018, though nothing came from that advisory referendum question. Now time is ticking to put this question back on this year's ballot.
The point of the referendum is to get the opinion of the public as to whether it makes sense to have one election authority that controls the entire county.
The idea to consolidate the Rockford Board of Election Commissioners with the Winnebago County Clerk's Election Division is nothing new, as voters were in favor of it in 2018. Now the Winnebago County Board's Operations and Administrative Committee will talk about the question making a return to the ballot with a focus on a clear wording for voters.
We're duplicating services, and the question is that necessary?
Board members say the main benefit will be saving taxpayers money. The Rockford Board of Elections handles operations within city limits through a bipartisan group of 3 people who are appointed by the circuit court. The Winnebago County Clerk, which is an elected position, controls everything else.
We do think that they would want to save tax dollars, and we don't know what that looks like. But in order to find that out, we've got to at least ask the voters if that's something they're interested in.
John Gavaris says there hasn't been enough data or serious conversations on this merger since Governor J.B. Pritzker passed a law in 2021 allowing local election authorities to use drop boxes and curbside voting.
I have, complete confidence and faith that, we all have the best intentions, and we're just trying to get to a good result, and we'll just see what we can do.